Hi guys, well it's a new year, new office and a new product. Today we're going to be casting a critical eye over the GIGABYTE Z390 Designare. As in previous generations, the Designare really focuses on content creation. As such, it presents a handful of features that you're not going to find on other boards on this platform. These headline features include support for CPU attached SSDs, meaning that an add-in card can bypass the chipset controller and work directly with the CPU to tap into higher bandwidth. The back panel is also loaded with ports, one of which is a DisplayPort 1.4 input, which gives you the ability there to transfer between a graphics card for Thunderbolt 3 pass-through. And that DisplayPort is going to give you up to 8K resolution. A Designare arrives with a price tag of $329 in the UK and $320 in the US. Unfortunately though, those of you guys who are in Australia, not going to be releasing over here unfortunately. And so with those prices, it's a bit more than you would expect from a typical Z390, but this board does appear to offer slightly more than you would expect for the mainstream segment. Perhaps if you aren't planning there to step up to the high-end desktop platform, this one might be a worthwhile consideration considering what's on offer. So for benchmark results, all of the performance, be sure to check out the link in the description. But with that intro out of the way, let's jump right in and explore this new board. Alrighty, well let's start with an unboxing of our Designare. As you can see, this is the packaging that it arrives in. Nothing much is given away on the front, but if we turn it round, you can see a depiction of the board with all the features pinpointed. This is actually an image from the product page of Designare, so if you want to go and have a look at that, you can do. But down at the bottom, the only thing really left to say is that it just has a tech spec and a diagram of the rear I/O. And inside the box we have the board in an anti-static bag, sits within this tray, which we're just going to remove. Underneath we've got the bundled accessories, and there actually aren't too many there as you can see, but what we do get is a DisplayPort cable, which allows you to do the DisplayPort in, so that connects to the larger one connects to the motherboard, and then that smaller mini DisplayPort will connect to your graphics card. You have the antenna for the 802.11ac Wi-Fi, that connects up to the back panel again. 4 SATA 3 cables. G-Connect, if you haven't seen one of these are really good. GIGABYTE include them on all their boards. Allows you to connect up your cables from your front panel really easily. A really handy piece of kit to have. There's a series of screws there for the SSDs. And then we have the documentation. So we've got the user manual, we've got the driver CD, which is a shame to see really. We've seen a few boards have USB now, so it would have been nice to see the USB, but those two things are included as standard. And then we have the multilingual installation guide. Okay, so here is Designare. Now since this board is intended for professional use, the overall look and feel is toned down to what you typically get there on a gaming oriented offering. The board itself has a matte black PCB with black and silver features there for the heatsinks, the ports and lanes. And as we'd expect, this board here conforms to the ATX form factor, so it's going to fit inside most mid-towers. You may think that RGB lighting would be omitted from this board, but it isn't. We get some pre-installed LEDs on the heat sinks, the audio section and the rear I/O, all of which can be modified using GIGABYTE software. We also get a single 12-volt RGB header at the bottom of the board for lighting strips. Now this is an Intel Z390 board, and so naturally we're dealing with socket 1151, and so this is primarily designed for Intel's 9th generation of processors such as the i9-9900K. However, if you do have a Coffee Lake CPU such as the 8700K, then that is compatible too. Designare uses a 12+1 phase digital VRM configuration. GIGABYTE are actually using 2 large heatsinks to cover this area. Those heatsinks there use direct touch, and they also feature thicker than usual thermal pads. Now we have stressed the system with a 5 gig overclock applied for over an hour, and the VRM temps there jump up by around 20 degrees, settling around 70 centigrade after that sustained period of time. And just behind that top heatsink we have an 8+4 pin CPU power arrangement there, which should be ample for decent overclocking. Now for the fan headers, we get a total of 5, all of which are hybrid headers, meaning that you can have them in different modes, so you can change from PWM or voltage. And there are also up to 6 thermal sensors in key locations so that you can keep an eye on things. Next we have the memory, which allows for dual channel DDR4 up to 64 gig, up to 4266 MHz frequency, and XMP is available as well. As you can see, these slots here use the steel reinforcement just like other sections of Designare. Now near the memory we also get a USB 3 header and a USB 3.1 Gen 2 header, which is now native to Z390. Storage is well catered for by Designare. We've got a total of 6 SATA 36G ports for SATA based drives, and there are 2 M.2 slots which are both PCI Express Gen 3 X4. And those M.2s have the thermal guards there, which are designed really to sit over the top of the SSD to bring down the temperatures. Now in the PCI Express region, we've got quite a lot going on. There are triple PCI Express 3.0 X16s and double PCI Express 3.0 X1s. And the modes for each of those X16s are 16, 8 and 4. Now the benefit with Designare is that those PCI Express slots are CPU attached, and so if you do drop in an SSD add-in card, it's going to bypass the chipset and work directly with the CPU for higher throughput. And another note is that each of those X16s have the steel reinforcements as well. Now at the top of the PCI Express we have a Wi-Fi module installed into that provided M.2. This is the 802.11ac Intel dual band unit, which delivers 160 MHz and up to 1.73 gigabit data rate. And that is all possible due to having Wave 2 technology. And as well as that Wi-Fi connectivity, Bluetooth 5 is supported too. Shifting over to the audio, which is right next to that PCI Express, we have an interesting assortment of components. The package here is driven by Realtek's ALC1220VB codec, and it is accompanied by smart headphone amp, which detects the impedance of your headset automatically. We've got gold solid caps with red Weimers, separated left and right channels, and isolated circuitry to prevent that interference. And so a pretty capable audio solution which works really well, as our audio testing can confirm, especially if you aren't intending there to get a dedicated sound card. Okay, and finally we've got the rear I/O section of Designare, and just a brief glance of this highlights how many ports we get. And so we've got 2 USB 2 ports, PS2 keyboard mouse combo port, HDMI out, DisplayPort 1.4 in, 2 antennas to work with the Wi-Fi module, 2 USB 3.1 Gen 2 Type-C ports, those are Thunderbolt 3, 2 USB 3.1 Gen 1 ports, those are Type A, 2 USB 3 ports, those use the DAC up 2 technology, twin gigabit LAN, those use the Intel controllers, 2 USB 3 ports, and then all of the audio ports. So plenty of high-speed connectivity there to transfer data, and we have the USB DAC, which Gigabyte includes on most of their boards. Basically it gives you a very clean signal, compensates for voltage drop, especially if you're going to be using long cables. Now with the DisplayPort in, we can take advantage of linking the graphics card to the motherboard and then utilize Thunderbolt 3 to share or transfer to another device. And those Thunderbolt 3 ports offer double the bandwidth from the second generation, so that is 40 gig, and you can daisy chain up to 12 devices. Okay, so that is the Z390 Designare. It arrives with some of those typical attributes you'd expect and receive on most boards in this category, but it also steps into the domain of the content creator by adding in some features that's going to appeal to this group of users. Support for CPU attached SSDs for greater bandwidth, also ideal if you're going to be using Intel SSDs that are add-in cards. Also has the DisplayPort 1.4 in. It's going to work with Thunderbolt 3 pass-through. And so particularly with that Thunderbolt 3 controller, this is an element which is going to be absent on most boards. However, if you aren't going to need such features, especially such an extensive rear I/O panel, then you'd be better off going for something with a smaller price tag. Now, you're going to get the same performance, 80% of the same features on a mid-range offering. Overclocking with Designare is, as we found on other boards, very good. We managed to hit 5 gig on the 9900K without much effort. We required 1.3 volts. And as well as that, the VRM sensor remained around 70 degrees with that overclock applied for well over an hour. So to summarise, if you are likely to take advantage of some of the special features Designare brings, Thunderbolt 3 CPU attached SSDs, then it's a great board to pick up. Otherwise, stick with something which is in the mid-range tier to save yourself some cash. You know, there are plenty of boards out there with a generous amount of USB ports, storage options and other perks which content creators demand. So as always, the full review for this board here is going to be on the screen in the description very soon. Over there, all of the performance figures from those benchmarks. And just as a side note, you'll notice that we had no review of the RTX 2060 at launch. Unfortunately, Nvidia were late in sending the sample out to us, so for those interested, we'll still have a review of this, but it's going to be on Vortez.net. For video content, we'll be focusing more on those partner cards over the coming weeks, so stay tuned for that. Please subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content just like this. Take care guys, and I'll see you guys next time.